So, you're a veteran getting into tech and you're wondering, do I aim for like a big enterprise job or take a shot at a startup? Both are life changing, but it's a different ride each way. Here's how. So, I made it in tech. I'm a software engineer and I want to help you navigate your entrance into the tech world if that's what you're interested in. And today, I want to talk about just the different side of working enterprise level and working at startup level. So, what do we call enterprise? For this section, I'll just speak about what it's like to be at enterprise tech and the things that you can reasonably expect. So enterprise techs are your large companies. So Amazon, Google, Facebook. Um, so if it's a large company, usually they're in the stock market. One of those large companies, you don't necessarily have to work for a tech company to work in enterprise level. Walmart has a large tech department because that's their goal as a company. A lot of the airlines have a tech team because they need products built for their use. So enterprise doesn't mean necessarily a tech enterprise, but just a large company, um, usually like Fortune 500 type situation. Um, and what you can expect from working is a clear job title. And it's very likely that you'll be doing things under that job title, not other things. The salaries tend to be pretty standardized at that level, and the benefits are also pretty standardized. Some companies, not all companies, have veteran hiring programs. They do partnerships with SkillBridge, or they won awards. And if you want a thick support network, try to look at what companies have won for veteran employment or veteran support. Those are good places to start. And in a large enterprise company, it'll be simpler for you to find mentorship and to find a lot of structure with what you're doing. And then you'll be able to use tools and security at enterprise level, which at least for me is very interesting because the use cases of enterprise companies are so large. There's so many factors to consider that I think it makes it for a more interesting approach. But some people find it limiting because the use case has so many requirements. On the downside, you may feel like the work takes a slower pace because there are so many layers, so many approvals, and so much that needs to happen for any project to take place. And not all enterprise companies kind of flow at the same speed. So if you hate a slow pace, there are departments and there's places within enterprise that are not committed to the slow pace. So don't let that be the deciding factor, but it is a reality in certain situations, in certain departments, for certain projects. And there's more red tape. Definitely, there's a lot more procedures that have been built. Usually, the longer a company has been or has been doing a certain type of project, the more structured their path is. And some people feel like their impact is just really short because you're working on a project that is so big that your individual impact feels small. And that can not be as rewarding for people as they would like. So those are some of the downsides of enterprise level work. On the other side, we have startups. And startups, it's kind of harder to categorize them, but they usually follow a certain set of patterns. Startups that need tech workers are usually tech startups, and they're usually funded in a specific way because tech products just are that expensive and you just need that amount of funding. So for example, even just the cloud expenditures of a startup can be really high. It doesn't even you don't even have to go for like salary to look at the expenses of trying to build software or trying to build tech or whatever it is that the startups are trying to build. Um, so there's that. There's usually a lot more fluidity in a startup. So your job title may actually not line up with your responsibilities because it's just so fluid about what's needed in that moment. Also, the job security is not comparable at all because startups live and die by funding, whereas enterprise, they consistently profit every year or take losses, but it's a lot more stable than a startup that just received a funding round and may run out at any given moment. And it will be determined if more investors come in to keep it going. So the funding situation is not equal across enterprise or across startup. And if you propose a project in enterprise and you get funding, you get funding. In a startup, the funding situation is a lot more fluid. And some people like that. They like to explore the possibilities, whereas some people, want that surety that kind of comes more with enterprise. In a startup, you really can take a lot of responsibility, even when may not be necessarily qualified for it. So, for example, an enterprise level might not consider you qualified for something, but at a startup level, it just needs to be done. And if you're capable of doing it, just do it. And that's the kind of shift of attitude of needing to be qualified before being allowed to do something versus in a startup, if it needs to get done, and if you within reason can do it without breaking it, then usually, depending on the startup leadership, they'll usually just let you do it because it needs to get done, and whatever progress is made, it matters more than the surety that you are qualified or lowering the risk, because they have a different risk matrix than enterprise level. In the startup world, the possibility of equity is purely life-changing. Some people manage to get a startup job, and if things go well, they're able to retire with just the equity from that. In enterprise tech, you could get some stock options depending on your level, but that probably will not be at the time that you're breaking in. And that won't even be a discussion for many years at the enterprise level, if you're just breaking now, which is kind of where this video is aimed at. But at startup level, even at beginner levels, you could potentially be getting equity included in your packages. And if the startup goes well, you could be work optional within 5 to 6 years, depending on startup growth. It has happened for some people, but then again, some people just experience the rise and fall of a startup, and they continue working at startups multiple times before anything breaks. And that's the risk with startups. It could go very well and turn into a much larger company, or the market fit and the idea just don't take off. But if you are looking for that equity, startups are definitely the way to find it. Enterprise will not be giving you anything comparable for many, many years, even in tech. The benefits of startups are usually nowhere near as put together as enterprise. However, usually the trend is you'll at least get health insurance, but more than that is probably not going to happen. So if you're a fan of the benefits, if those are really like game changing for you, startups may not be the right fit for you. And in startups, you could be doing something one week, something the other week. So if you really like the fast paced learning and you want to get experience in a lot of things, startups are great because people are not going to stop you from learning, and it really helps when you're able to add another perspective to the product or able to figure out a problem that nobody has solved before. So the impact can feel a lot greater. And the barriers to work on something new are a lot lower. In enterprise, if you want to get experience in something that you don't have experience in, you have to network your way to that. But in a startup, it's probably just a matter of asking and being able to deliver some progress. So that's the startup mindset versus what you might see at the enterprise level. Some startups can pay competitively. Some startups pay on the lower end of the range. It really depends on the specific leadership of the startup. But there's no, I would say, like industry set trend. Some people find that it's easier to start working at startup in terms of internships or anything else. So that can be a real consideration in you're balancing the two, but they are going to be a lot more demanding than an enterprise level job because there's just simply a lot more work for a lot fewer people. And now you decide if you want to break into tech, what makes sense for you? Do you prefer the structure of enterprise, or do you want the explosive growth potential and the freedom that comes with working at a startup? And that's okay. You don't have to stick with either. You could aim for one type of work, and then if you discover it's a fit or not a fit, you could then work on after. You don't have to stay in anything for an incredibly long time. You do have to stay for a reasonable amount of time. I would advise that. But the world is your oyster, and I'm just here to help show you both sides. Are there any more questions that you guys have? Put them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And we'll be back next week with more content.